Empires don't announce their replacements. There was never a formal declaration. No treaty was signed that said, Britain is finished, America is next. There was no single moment when the world officially changed rulers. And yet, if you look back at the mid-20th century, you can see it happening. The British Empire was fading, and the United States was suddenly everywhere. This wasn't a rise to power through old-school colonies or outright conquest. This was about a new kind of power, control. So, this isn't just a story about how Britain declined. It's the story of how its collapse cleared the stage for what we now call the American century. For more than 200 years, the British Empire was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. It controlled everything that mattered: global trade routes, the most powerful navy on the planet, and colonies on every single continent. You know that famous phrase, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." That wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a literal fact. Somewhere on Earth, at any given moment, the sun was shining on British territory. Britain ruled the seas, the ports, the global currencies, and even the laws that governed international trade. London was the Wall Street of its day, the undisputed center of global finance. The British pound was the world's reserve currency, the one everyone trusted. But here's the thing about empires: they don't always collapse because they become weak. Sometimes they collapse simply because the world changes faster than they can adapt. And that's exactly what happened. The world was spinning into a new era, with new technologies, new economies, and new ideas about power. The foundations of the old British system began to crack, not from a single blow, but from the relentless pressure of a changing world. Britain's vast network of colonies, once a source of immense strength, started to become a burden. The cost of maintaining a global empire was skyrocketing, just as the benefits were starting to shrink. The world was shifting, and a new power was waiting in the wings, ready to write the next chapter of history. Running an empire is a shockingly expensive business. Think about it. By the early 20th century, Britain was essentially the world's policeman. This wasn't just a fancy title. It meant policing half the globe, maintaining an absolutely enormous navy that patrolled every ocean, and constantly managing rebellions and unrest across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Every single colony, no matter how small, needed money to run. Every single ship in that massive navy needed fuel, and lots of it. And every crisis, from a local uprising to a diplomatic standoff, required a show of force, which costs a fortune. On the surface, Britain was still the most powerful nation on Earth, but underneath, it was a different story. The empire was running on fumes, a combination of past momentum and a mountain of debt. It was like a grand old building that looked magnificent from the outside, but had crumbling foundations. And then, just when the cracks were starting to show, came the wars that Britain simply could not afford. Now, World War I didn't destroy the British Empire overnight. It wasn't that dramatic, but it fundamentally and permanently changed Britain's position in the world. Britain emerged from the war on the winning side, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The country was deeply, deeply damaged. It was saddled with massive war debts that would take generations to pay off. Its industrial base, once the workshop of the world, was weakened and facing new competition. And perhaps most tragically, an entire generation of its young men had been wiped out on the battlefields of Europe. But the most significant change of all was financial. Before the war, Britain was the world's banker, the primary lender to other nations. After the war, that role was reversed. Britain was no longer the lender. It had become a borrower, and the country it borrowed from, the one now holding the purse strings, was the United States. This was it. This was the first quiet, almost unnoticed, shift of global power. The torch was being passed, not in a grand ceremony, but in the dry, unforgiving pages of a ledger book. The age of American dominance had begun, built on the debts of a fading British Empire. Ever wonder how the United States became the world's superpower? It wasn't overnight. In fact, just before World War I, America looked very different. It wasn't a global ruler. It didn't have a massive overseas empire like Britain or France. Instead, its focus was on internal growth, building up its own country. International involvement was pretty limited. America was like a giant, quietly building its strength at home. Then, World War I exploded across Europe. This devastating conflict created an unexpected opportunity for the United States. While the great powers of Europe were locked in a brutal fight, destroying their industries and draining their resources, America was busy producing. It became the workshop of the world, churning out weapons, food, and machinery for the warring nations. It also became the world's banker, lending vast sums of money to the Allies. By the time the war ended in 1918, the world had been turned upside down. Gold from all over the globe flowed into American banks. Europe was deeply in debt, owing America billions. American industry was now a dominant force in global production. While Britain still ruled a vast territory, a new kind of power was emerging. America was beginning to rule the global systems of finance and trade. If World War I cracked the foundations of the British Empire, World War II delivered the final blow. Britain fought with incredible bravery and resilience, but it was fighting on borrowed strength. Much of that strength was borrowed from the United States, through programs like Lend-Lease. By the time the war ended in 1945, the cost was staggering. British cities were scarred by bombing, its economy was completely exhausted, and the empire was financially bankrupt. In stark contrast, America emerged from the war stronger than ever. Its industrial heartland was untouched by the fighting. It was the undisputed financial leader and possessed overwhelming military supremacy, especially with its sole possession of the atomic bomb. The transfer of power was complete. The British Empire didn't fall in a great climactic battle. It simply collapsed under the immense cost of maintaining global leadership through to world wars. The torch had been passed, and a new era, the American century, had begun. Have you ever wondered why the world map looks the way it does? Why the great empires of the past, like the British Empire, just seem to vanish? The story you think you know is only half the truth. After 1945, the world was done with empires. The cost of ruling distant lands was skyrocketing. Rebellions were flaring up everywhere, from India to Africa, and perhaps most importantly, the global mood had changed. The idea of one nation ruling another was no longer acceptable. The age of direct colonial control was over. Now, here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Everyone expected America, the new global superpower, to step into Britain's shoes and build its own empire. But it didn't. Instead, America did something far more revolutionary. It didn't just replace the British Empire, it replaced the very idea of empire itself. How? Let's rewind to 1944. While World War II was still raging, a group of world leaders met quietly in Bretton Woods, a small town in New Hampshire, America. Their mission was monumental: to design the entire post-war global order. What they decided in that conference room changed the course of modern history. First, the US dollar was crowned the king of global currencies, the foundation for all international trade. Imagine every country needing dollars to buy and sell goods. That's the power we're talking about. Second, they created powerful new global financial institutions, like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, designed to stabilize the world economy. And third, all these new economic rules were established under American leadership. Now, you might be thinking, what about Britain? Did they just happily hand over the keys to the world? Not at all. Britain accepted this new reality not because it wanted to, but because it was backed into a corner. Its economy was shattered by the war. It desperately needed loans to rebuild, and it needed a stable global market to recover. And who controlled both the money and the rules? America. It was a transfer of power, not through conquest, but through economics. This wasn't the end of an empire. It was the beginning of a whole new kind of global system, a system we are still living in today. For centuries, one currency ruled them all: the British pound sterling. If you wanted to buy anything, from tea in China to cotton in America, you paid in pounds. The pound wasn't just money. It was the bedrock of global trade, a symbol of an empire on which the sun never set. For generations, London was the financial center of the universe, and the pound was its king. This was the era of the sterling standard. But then, the 20th century happened. Two devastating world wars brought the British Empire to its knees. The first war was a massive financial drain, but the second one was the final blow. Britain poured everything it had into the fight. By the end, the country was victorious but utterly bankrupt. Its factories were bombed out, its cities were in ruins, and most importantly, its gold reserves were almost gone. See, a dominant currency needs to be backed by something solid, something everyone trusts. Back then, that was gold. Britain simply didn't have enough gold left to back all the pounds floating around the world. It could no longer guarantee that you could exchange your pounds for a fixed amount of gold. Confidence, the most crucial ingredient for any currency, began to evaporate. The king was losing his crown. While Britain was bleeding, a new power was rising across the Atlantic. The United States. America came out of the war with its industries intact and holding most of the world's gold. At a famous conference in Bretton Woods in 1944, a new world order was forged. The US dollar, convertible to gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce, officially took the pound's place. The world moved from the sterling standard to the dollar standard. So what does it mean to have the world's dominant currency? It's not just about bragging rights, it's about power. It means you control the rules of global trade. It means you can borrow money more cheaply than anyone else, because everyone wants your currency. You can effectively print money to pay your debts, a privilege economists call exorbitant privilege. When the pound lost its throne, Britain didn't just lose its currency leadership, it lost the financial core of its empire. It was the end of an era and the beginning of a new one, the American century. The shift from the pound to the dollar reshaped our world in ways we still feel today. Have you ever wondered when the world as we know it today really began? The answer might surprise you. After the devastation of war, the world was desperate for a new way forward. International institutions sprang up, promising stability, recovery, and development for all. But there was a catch. These new bodies also set the rules for what was considered acceptable economic behavior. They decided who got access to capital and who could participate in global trade. Think about it this way. Britain had once policed the world with its powerful navy, its warships a symbol of its dominance. America, on the other hand, chose a different weapon: rules. And once these rules were accepted by enough countries, they became the permanent foundation of the new global order. The game had changed, and America was now the one writing the rulebook. For centuries, the British Empire had proudly proclaimed that it ruled the waves. But maintaining that kind of power in the modern era wasn't just about having the most ships. It required a constant flow of massive funding, cutting-edge technology, and a complex global logistics network that could project power anywhere on the planet. The truth was, after the immense cost of the wars, Britain simply couldn't afford to be the world's policeman anymore. But America could. This financial and industrial might allowed the United States to build a new global security structure with itself at the very center. Alliances were formed, bases were established, and a new network of power was woven across the globe. Britain, once the undisputed leader, gracefully transitioned into a new role, a key partner, but no longer the one in charge. This wasn't just a political shift. It was the precise moment that the torch of global military leadership was passed from one great power to another. The American era had officially begun. Have you ever wondered why the British Empire, which once covered a quarter of the globe, just faded away after World War II? Many people think it was a grand, generous gesture of granting independence. But the truth is a lot more complicated, and frankly, a lot more practical. After 1945, Britain was exhausted and nearly bankrupt. The war had taken a massive toll, and the country desperately needed to rebuild itself from the ground up. Suddenly, those vast overseas colonies weren't a source of pride and profit anymore. They were a massive drain. Think about it. Maintaining an empire is incredibly expensive. You need armies, administrators, and infrastructure. Plus, the world was changing. Nationalist movements were gaining steam across Africa and Asia, making the colonies increasingly unstable and politically dangerous to hold on to. Riots, rebellions. It was a constant headache. Back in London, the political will to maintain the empire was crumbling. The priority was rebuilding homes, creating the National Health Service, and taking care of people in Britain. The empire had become a liability. So, as Britain pulled back, who filled the power vacuum? You might think the United States, the new global superpower, would just swoop in and take over these colonies. But they played a much smarter, more subtle game. America didn't need to conquer territories in the same way. The British Empire was built on administration, law, and the occasional use of force. The new American Empire, however, was built on something far more powerful: attraction. It was an empire of culture. Think about the irresistible pull of Hollywood movies, the beat of rock and roll and jazz, the allure of brands like Coca-Cola and Levi's jeans. It was the dream of a better, more modern life. People around the world didn't necessarily aspire to be British anymore. With its traditions and rigid class structures, they wanted to be American. They wanted the freedom, the coolness, the technology, and the opportunity that America represented. This is what's called soft power. When people willingly adopt your culture, listen to your music, and buy your products, you don't need to rule them with an iron fist. They become part of your sphere of influence because they want too. America won the post-war world, not by taking Britain's colonies, but by winning the world's hearts and minds. And that, in many ways, is a far more enduring form of power. Have you ever heard the term American century? What does it actually mean? Many people think it implies America rules the world with an iron fist, but the reality is far more subtle, and honestly, far more powerful. It's not about total control. It's about structural dominance. Think about it. Global trade, the lifeblood of the modern economy, flows through systems largely designed and backed by the United States. The dollar is the world's reserve currency, and major financial institutions operate within an American-led framework. Then there's global security. From the North Atlantic to the Pacific, international security often relies on American military capacity and its network of alliances. This presence doesn't mean America is policing every corner of the globe, but its power projects a security umbrella that shapes global politics. And let's not forget culture. Hollywood movies, pop music, fast food, and tech giants. American cultural influence is everywhere. It sets trends and shapes aspirations in a way no empire before ever could. So, America didn't rule the world in the traditional sense, like the British Empire did. Instead, it shaped the environment in which the entire world operates. That's a level of influence that goes beyond conquest. It's about setting the rules of the game. Britain ruled openly, its power visible in its colonies and viceroys. America's power is quieter, embedded in the very systems we all use every day. It's the difference between being the landlord and owning the entire city's infrastructure. This contrast becomes even clearer when you look at how their power was sustained. Britain lost its grip by fighting costly wars to maintain its empire, draining its resources and its will. America, on the other hand, often gained power by financing wars it didn't directly suffer from, emerging stronger while others were weakened. The British Empire exhausted itself trying to hold on to its territories. America built a systemic global order that largely maintains itself, with allies and institutions that share the burden and reinforce its position. This isn't about judging whether this is good or bad, but about understanding the unique nature of American power in the 20th and 21st centuries. It's a story of influence, not just of empire, of shaping the world, not just ruling it. What do you think this means for the future? Let me know in the comments. Why do empires fall? The answer might surprise you. Take the British Empire. For centuries, it seemed invincible, permanent. The sun never set on it, they said. But it didn't collapse because it was weak. It collapsed because it became too expensive to maintain. Leadership is costly. Systems, once efficient, can outgrow their capacity. And most importantly, rivals adapt faster. Think about it like this. An empire falls when the cost of controlling everything exceeds the benefit of that control. It's a tipping point. For Britain, that day came. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic explosion. It was a slow, quiet, but permanent unraveling. One day, the empire was there. The next, it was history. From the ashes of that collapse, something new rose, the American century. The United States stepped onto the world stage, its influence spreading just as Britain's had receded. But here's the crucial lesson. History never stops. Power is like energy. It's never destroyed. It just relocates. It flows away from those who fail to adapt and towards those who do. The British Empire collapsed. The American century was born. This is the cycle of history. It's a continuous transfer of influence, a constant reshuffling of the global order. And right now, as we speak, history is already setting the stage for the next great transition of power. The question isn't if it will happen, but who will rise next? What do you think? Who is poised to lead the next era of history? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this perspective interesting, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. Thanks for watching.